DEGA xa ai làm răn lá vàng, trong trường tham bên màu oanh cười lan lên lan cơi xem ru.
To visit the United States and go up and visit Capitol Hill. And the proof that Nate got of this, he had a copy of the hotel bill from the Hay Adams Hotel and the credit card signed by Teddy Boom to pay for their stay there. So, so not surprisingly, Teddy Boom sued the Far Eastern Economic Review because he saying basically calling a suspected drug dealer was libeling him. What Nate managed to do is that he persuaded the CIA bureau chief in some other Asian country, far away, or may not unnamed, to give him the U.S. government watch list of suspected drug dealers, and Teddy Bouma's name was on it. Case closed. So Nate, when the Kurdish allowed Nate to be the only journalist to witness the jungle trial, it was not luck. Nate always built relationships over a long time in all kinds of ways. But one of the ways he built relationships with Khmer Rouge is that he allowed the Khmer Rouge military chief of staff to actually stay with him on a visit to Bangkok when the Khmer Rouge wanted to go and visit bookstores and buy books on human rights law. They were trying to figure out if they could get back into power legally. And they told me that as they were going around Bangkok together, going to different bookstores, the guy kept seeing all these KFCs that were around Bangkok. And finally I asked him, like, hey, who is that man? And he said, well, that's Colonel Sanders. And the guy said, he must be a very important man. Now, as Sarah can undoubtedly testify, Nate would file like a lot of copy, like reams and reams of impeccably reported copy, but it was very lengthy and often repetitious. And the jungle trial story was no different. But filed it, and I did my thing, pulling together the sidebars and getting ready. But the main bar, the eyewitness account, nobody could do that writing except for Nate. And I remember spending a restless night in a hotel room near the review offices in Causeway Bay, Hong Kong. Because we basically told the whole world we were going to have this exclusive scoop, but we still didn't have the main bar, and the day we were supposed to go to press. But that morning at 7:30, email comes in, and there's this beautifully crafted eyewitness account, which is like sighed relief, like he did it. Still, when the interview story came out, I didn't take any chances. I just got on a plane to Bangkok and holed up with him in the review office. So this was another exclusive, despite the efforts of a New York Times reporter to follow him to the rendezvous point. On the way, that New York Times reporter encountered teenage Khmer Rouge soldiers with automatic weapons, and as Nate said, they didn't know who the New York Times was, and if they did, they wouldn't give him a shit. So he got the exclusive. Now the problem was, he came back with this fantastic interview, but I don't know if this is, the story, but at one point he thought he was being poisoned because he felt sick, and he reached over across the table and he grabbed Pol Pot's water glass and he just slurped the whole thing down, and he said he felt better. But to tell you the truth, he was not in great shape that week. He got back with all this great video. He promptly just collapsed on the couch in the review office. But thanks to AsiaWorks, I guess I had all this great video to work with. So I just started putting together the stories, and I just had to run them past Nate to review it. And then years later, he says to me, "Sherry, I know exactly what was going through your mind." I was like, "What?" He's like, "You were saying, if Nate dies now, will I have enough to finish the story?" And I admit it, you heard that is what was going through my mind. But look at who the accuser was, right? This is the guy who decided to go across multiple, battle lines to test, basically, because there was supposedly a ceasefire was in place, and he wanted to test it, and you know, he only survived that running over the anti-tank mine because he was in one of these Russian-made trucks where the engine block is in the front and the seats are on top of the engine block, and that was what stopped the blast of the anti-tank mine from killing him and killed the 2 people right next to him. So, you know, he was criticizing me for being too relentlessly focused on journalism, but there was nobody more relentlessly focused on journalism than Nate. Now, look, you know, that approach, it didn't always serve Nate well. When he, you know, when he was back in Maryland and he was working on his book, he was just determined to write day and night, and he persuaded a local doctor to prescribe amphetamines for him so he could just work and work more. And then it just triggered like a psychotic episode. And so I was down there basically trying to show him that, you know, Carroll has not bugged his computer and phone and nothing like this was going on. And he still didn't believe it until he said one day he looked out the window and he saw Viet Cong guerrillas approaching the house. And he's like, this can't be true. My mind is playing tricks on me. So ultimately, it was Nate's journalistic skepticism that snapped him back out of that and left him with a good story to tell.
All right.
So Nate used to refer to himself as the black sheep of his family. Well, listen, there's no question that the Boston Theater are amazingly, you know, accomplished with a real record of service, whether it's, you know, ambassador like, you know, like Nate's father, Deputy Secretary of State like his cousin, aid worker. But, you know, I think all of us recognize is that service was what Nate devoted his life to as well. Yes, he was about great stories, but the reason he chased them was because he just couldn't stand it when ordinary people were being screwed over, whether it was by a genocidal dictator, you know, neo-Nazis, or, you know, local government bureaucrats, and he would fight for them, and that's what he did. He was a great man and a great friend. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from MP Noonan, a photojournalist and friend of Nate's, who took the photograph of him and his dog Lamont on the back of the program.
I remember the first time I met Nate in Phnom Penh. I was 23 and just starting out on my own path toward becoming a journalist. A bunch of us were standing around outside the little village of prefab containers that served as office space at the UN headquarters, waiting to be let in for a press conference. I said something like, "Hi, I'm MP, and I don't think we've met." There were gasps around me. Astonished colleagues turned and stared, saying, "You don't know Nate?" His reputation from up on the border had preceded him. Years later in Cape Cod, Nate told me once how surprised he was that people used to find him intimidating. I thought, are you kidding? Besides the gasps he provoked, he was tall, he was fit, he was broad-chested, he had a shaven head, he was soft-spoken, and when you asked him who he worked for, as I eventually did that day, the answer was fear. As everyone in this room knows, that stands for the Far Eastern Economic Review. But the double entendre was a vibe that worked for him. We know he wore it well, doing the hard yards of the Khmer Rouge and making the inroads that no one else had. 6 postings later now, I often think of how the press corps functions as a tribe in the most positive sense, the shared purpose of journalism, the camaraderie of working in the situations we do, covering the events we cover. Nate and my friendship became cemented over the years as members of that tribe, and also through our shared losses of people like Stefan Ellis and Jamie Factor, Kathleen O'Keefe, remembered as indelible parts of our experience as Nate will be now. As we know, Nate had an anti-authority streak and a real affinity for bad guys. His desire to hold them accountable and to call them out was at times tinged with just a little bit of admiration, not for the slaughter, but for the daring, the willingness to break history's rules. That's part of the reason he focused on Pol Pot, on Teng Bun Man, Hun Sen, on the North Koreans and the like. It was about being the one to write a new page of history. Nate's life in Cape Cod was much, much smaller than Cambodia and Thailand days because of his health issues and PTSD. He still believed in journalism, and his reporting turned to outing white supremacists and neo-Nazis on his blog. I was there once when the FBI called, and Nate routinely took calls on speakerphone. They clearly followed Nate's reporting and just wanted a friendly chat. Nate didn't believe journalists should collaborate with authorities, so he would be mad at me for saying this. I was sworn to secrecy, but he did give the FBI a little bit of extra info on one person he'd written about because he was genuinely afraid that man was going to be a mass shooter. The subjects of Nate's reporting were clearly worried. I read the online threats to Nate's life, and probably worse in Nate's mind, the threats to Lamont, his dog, by neo-Nazis for having been exposed. I was there another time when Nate put on speakerphone for me a harassing phone call he got by some anonymous bad guy who felt threatened. This brings me to the last thought I want to share you with. Decades after that day, my friend Nate and I met for the first time in Phnom Penh, and as diminished as his life had become, when it came to reporting, Nate's vibe was still all about intimidation and fear, and he wore it well.
Now we'll hear from Nate's friend and fellow journalist Rajaveri Dong.
Hello, so I was supposed to joke, so I might get emotional. Nate was a friend, so I met him in 1992, the very first time, when Roland Eng brought me to a bar in Bangkok called the Front Page. There was Nate, David Brunstrom, David McCage, Jerry Wagstaff. So wow, that was a great introduction. I didn't want to be a journalist, I never wanted to be. And